What is the future of the Clash in NASCAR? Well, I think that's something that needs to be on the front of a lot of people's minds heading through 2024, as this is the final year of the 3-year deal that NASCAR has with the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Now, obviously, they can have extensions done and other things like that, but it does feel like this event at the Coliseum is fizzling out. The first year seemed like it was a huge deal, and over 4 million people tuned in, which is pretty darn good for NASCAR nowadays. It still had well over 3 million last year, but it definitely felt like it had taken a step down. And now this year, it just feels like everything is kind of last second, and it just does not feel like the big event that NASCAR was propping it up to be in years past, and it just feels like everything has sort of taken its course. NASCAR has gotten about what they could out of the current deal. So, moving forward, what's the goal? Well, I think there's 3 main pillars that need to be looked at when it comes to the Clash and deciding its future. First off, you need to nail the start of the season and make a lot of hype for the year heading into Daytona. That big event at the Clash, while not making the Daytona 500 ratings go up by any means in 2022, did help the season overall bring in new fans. And that's something that the Clash needs to do, being the first event that NASCAR will have in any way, especially before the Daytona 500, the biggest event in the sport. And also, it needs to be big enough to stick in people's minds for 2 weeks if you have it the week before the Super Bowl again. It's really easy for something to be a big deal when there's no football going on, because we do not count the Pro Bowl as real football, and then have the Super Bowl the next week. You need to have that entire 2-week gap filled. And it needs to make new people show up and stay. It can't be something that's just normal for a NASCAR fan because, well, yeah, we'll show up for maybe the first one to see how it is and then fizzle away, which is a common theme we've seen with a lot of changes in recent years. I went to the Clash at Daytona in 2021, and I just gotta say, it was not very fun, and being on a road course didn't help either. That's not going to make new people show up, and being there in person outside the finish itself, it's not going to make people stay. And it also needs to revitalize the event again, both in the short and hopefully long term. The short term is what happened with the LA Clash. It made the event pretty big for a couple years, but now it seems to be in need of a bit of a revamp again. If you're able to have something stand for longer than 3 years, I'd say it's preferable. Kind of like what the old Clash at Daytona had for a long time. Yeah, they'd revamp it with different rules things, but for the longest time, this event stayed high in regard for many NASCAR fans, and the viewership numbers show it. I mean, at one point when the Pro Bowl was still good, the Clash, then the Shootout, was actually beating them in viewership and attendance because it was that good of an event. Now, this isn't saying that going back to Daytona will fix all, but more that you can learn from what worked in the past and use it for new projects. So, what are the options? Well, let's look at going back to Daytona. I think that this is a short-term option. I do not think that this is going to be something that makes this event a big deal for the long term. You see, it'll make a lot of old school fans and diehards happy. A lot of NASCAR fans want this event back. It is tradition. It's something that we all like. And of course, most NASCAR fans seem to really like super speedway racing. Why wouldn't they? And I would say that if you're going to do this, you gotta make it a night race again. It was fun for a bit having it as a day race, but it sort of droned on, and if you have it as a night race, you could especially make it a Saturday night race and have it the week before, being the day before the Super Bowl instead of the week before, which you can then use to maybe garner a little more hype for speed weeks. That could be something that works. Go back to what worked before. But if you can't do that and you want to still keep it all condensed, maybe make it Saturday night after the Xfinity race. Move that race back a bit into the daytime, again, where it used to be, and then from there, you can have the Cup race end the day. You'll have the huge crowd that might bring the huge energy, as we saw for the Truck and Xfinity races last year before the Daytona 500, And on top of that, it could be a much needed testing session and a little added track time that many fans desperately want, which would make the event, at least in regard to the Daytona 500 coming right after it, more important. Now, of course, the issue you might be looking at is that if a driver gets banged up in that, they're going to be at a disadvantage for the biggest race of the season. That is something to look at as well. But still, it is an option. Then you do have to also look at the problems. And the big problem is that this race had major issues at the end of its run at Daytona. A lot of the races were single file lines for much of the day. Nobody wanted to get into a crash. Nobody wanted to lose position. Nobody honestly seemed to care where they finished in this until the very end, which is why we saw them go from single file boring races that devolved into complete wreck fests. The Clash in 2020 being the prime example of this. It was awful, and a lot of people remember it for that. It's the reason they started changing stuff with the Clash. I guarantee if it was just a boring race, NASCAR would have had another year or two with the Clash being a Daytona race. So that is something to me that just says this race might be fun in the short term, but I think it would be bound to fail again if you go back to the Daytona Oval. Now, what about the Daytona backstretch? I've seen others bring this up before, kind of like the Battle at the Beach a little bit, where it'd be a new thing for Cup and it would add to speed weeks. You'd still have that at-track experience for fans at Daytona, and you could maybe have some removable grandstands brought back there for people to come in. You could only have 5,000-10,000 people maybe watch it in person, but it would look full and nobody would ask otherwise. I think that you could also adjust it to fit whatever layout you need, whether it is a quarter mile or a half mile or anywhere in between. But the big problem with that one is the current, and based on what drivers have said, possibly unfixable, bad short track package. That could be a huge problem, and I think until they fix the short track racing, you can't bank on a short track, especially if it's around a half mile or so, which they could probably do on the backstretch of Daytona. You cannot bank on a short track to save an event. I'm looking at the All-Star race for this one, unfortunately. And then maybe you could look at other stadiums. It could be a long-term, maybe rotation of different stadiums to spice it up. You'd have new markets, new looks as well with different stadiums and different fans, and I think it would fit what they did with the Coliseum. With the Coliseum, they tried to reach out to a Los Angeles audience, an audience that easily is not the main demographic of NASCAR fans, and generally it seems to have worked as numbers have, at least in some ways, went up there. You could do that in other stadiums and other cities. The problem is you have a very limited amount of venues to choose from. When you're looking at how it all lines up for the Daytona 500 and beforehand, you're looking at late January and early February as the months that you have to contend with, which takes out, I'd say, about 2/3 of stadiums in America simply for weather alone. Then you also have to take out the problem of domes. You're not going to have a bunch of gasoline-powered cars in a confined space. You're asking for people to be injured or worse. So you have a very limited amount of places to choose from. Also, some places like Texas or Tennessee that may have warm enough weather to have an event like that also have a lot of rain to deal with as well. I mean, I live in Tennessee and it's been snowing and raining for the better part of 2024 so far. I would say that Florida and California, maybe Las Vegas would be the best places you could do it, but it's about the stadiums. Jacksonville and Miami, to me, are the two biggest ones if you're able to make it work. Miami being the primary one, as NASCAR does need to take back a little bit of the market share down there away from F1, who has really come onto the scene really big in the last couple years. But with that, I'm going to pass it on to you, because the Clash is included in the Fox deal with NASCAR for the next 7 years in the media rights deal, and it's going to be something that needs to be in place through that. They could piece it together, sure, but that's not going to help the sport. So what do you think should be done with the Clash? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like in this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you so much to my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.